Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to everybody. It's good to see you guys here this morning. Take a seat. Join us. And just like that, I shut down community. People are trying to talk, hang out, socialize. Trying to be family, I know. Oh, yeah. Get out my phone here, share some thoughts with you guys. Share some thoughts. So my name is Garth. I'm one of the elders here at Redemption Church. So welcome. Hi, Garth. Okay, thanks. Morning. Typically, I have some family business to share with you, aka the announcements. So before I get to that, typically people will get on stage and share a prayer, a poem. I'm not a poetry guy. I'm a guy that thinks about stuff, and so I put some stuff on paper, and I thought I'd share it with you guys. In the spirit of Exploration Sunday, and in the spirit of this theme that we have of like forming as family, I've been kind of thinking through the idea of the prodigal son a bit more. Sorry. And I've been processing how the father and the brother would have reacted in a scenario where the son comes back and then he like hangs for a bit, gets reacquainted with the family, thrives for a season, and then leaves again. This idea of I've got my fill, but there's still this temptation to go out. There's still this temptation to leave and do it my way, and to leave the goodness of the Father. I think the idea of the Son returning the first time and everything being great, it's a wonderful picture, but I think that we are all capable of leaving again. And I think we also know the feeling of those in our lives that have proverbially left again. So if the son were to return a second time, I don't think the father's behavior would not be any different. But how would the older son respond this time around? And so I think the question that I was wrestling with is, are we experiencing the love of the Father towards the younger son? And are we learning to extend grace again? Or are we kind of doubling down on that initial kind of anger that we felt the first time when we saw the son return? Anyways, kind of what I've been processing is just this idea of as we form as family, I think that we are leaning into the grace that God is showing us so that we can be that family that helps the son return again and again. So those are my thoughts. Hey, Ibrahim, welcome. All right, on to the family business. So we have Ash Wednesday on February 14th, which is also Valentine's Day. It's at 5:30 p.m. here. Ash Wednesday is the kickoff of the Lent season, as you guys probably know. So it'll be a time of worship and prayer as we kind of step into the next 6 weeks of between now and Easter, which is crazy to think that we're already talking about Easter. Also, we have Connect cards in the very, very back. Connect cards, if you haven't filled one out yet, if you don't get the church newsletter, it's the best way to get plugged into what we are doing here as a church. So please fill out your email address. We'd love to get you that newsletter. It's everything that you would want to know about any kind of ministry that we're doing or just events that are taking place in general. And then this morning, like I said, this is Exploration Sunday. And so we are going to be having a panel here in a bit. The purpose of Exploration Sunday, so this is the first Sunday of the month, and so we do Exploration Sunday, which is our ability as a church to spiritually be curious about things that impact our lives and our communities. And so I'm excited to partake in the morning with the women that will be sharing about Exodus. And then lastly, giving. So giving is a part of our worship. So there are ways to give. You can scan. Oh, maybe not that one. But you can give. There's ways to do it on the church website and also in the back as well. So I'm going to welcome Mike up here. And do I just hand the mic over? Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Garth. Can we thank Garth for starting the morning off for us. As Garth already mentioned, today we're beginning a journey as we're going to be heading into Easter, as we approach Easter. And for us, this is a really significant time. As you'll see on the slide behind me, we have the season that we're kind of declaring this is we're talking about forming this family through the entire year of 2024. Part of being formed in family is recognizing that family is formed in the wilderness. And there is a tendency, and you'll see, like we did family portraits a couple weeks ago, and the idea when we talk about families, we're talking about the church family, like we are family. And we do recognize that when we say we're a church family, there are probably lots of experiences that you have where you probably have maybe not felt that when the church says we're family. And so this year, we want to walk through that faithfully. We want to create space to bring up concerns, to bring up challenges, to just be able to say, hey, here's what this has looked like, or here's what my experience is for me, but then also be able to step in intentionally. And so we are starting that today. And so we're kind of declaring this season as family in the wilderness. And we're going to be following along with the Exodus story, specifically how the Israelites were formed as family in the wilderness. And we'll see that was a process that took some time, right? That was a 40-year journey that they were on before they actually stepped into the promised land that was created for them. And I want to read a couple passages just to kind of start us off and to kind of just get us thinking a little bit about what family in the wilderness means. And in just a minute, I'm going to invite our panel up, and we're going to have some conversation and dialogue, and then there will be a space for some Q&R discussion time. And so be thinking about questions that you want to bring to the panel just to kind of stir up. But this is something that I want to kind of start off. So Exodus chapter 2, to kind of get us into the space of family in the wilderness, this is what verse 23 starts to say. It says, after a long time, the king of Egypt died, and the Israelites groaned because of their difficult labor, and they cried out, and their cry for help because of the difficult labor ascended to God. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God saw the Israelites, and I just love this, and God knew. And then skipping down to chapter 3, verse 7 through 8. Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people in Egypt, and have heard them crying out because of their oppressors. I know about their sufferings, and I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians, and to bring them from the land to a good and spacious land, flowing with milk and with honey. One of the most unsettling truths, I think, as we talk about if I think about my life particularly, is that most of the growth for me have come in seasons of the wilderness that I would define as wilderness. And I processing this a little bit this morning as well, it has felt like for me personally, and maybe you can relate a little bit, that I'm either coming out of a wilderness season, right? Or I'm about to go into a wilderness season, or I'm about to step into one. There's that reality of like wilderness, right? And when we think about the mountaintop experiences of life, when we go up to a mountaintop, and there's something really beautiful about that, but you don't stay on top of the mountain forever, right? In fact, on top of the mountain, you don't experience life. Like I've been on the top of some mountains. What's up there? Just dirt and gravel, right? Rocks. There's a certain point where trees literally can't even grow based on elevation, right? And all the beauty, the water, the life is in the valleys. It's in the wilderness. And so there are for sure seasons that we are up on the mountaintop, but most of our life is happening in the wilderness, right? It's happening below. And that's where the growth comes from. And for me, wilderness seasons have been all over the map. I was just writing down some, thinking about, the last, decade even, of what the wilderness seasons have been for me. It's included, unexpected job transitions, conflicts in relationship, death of loved ones, financial instability, loneliness, depression, anxiety, fears about the future, a recognition that I'm in fact not in control as much as I want to be. And as I've been just reflecting on those wilderness seasons over the last week, really, and as painful as they were, I can say with certainty that I grew in those seasons. I developed some resilience. I grew in my trust and dependence in God. My shoulders were a little bit more broadened for the things that God has called me to or the things that he was preparing me for. And I've learned that it's in my best interest to actually embrace seasons of wilderness. Not to run away from them, not to try to fight my way out of them, but to embrace it. Because it's in the wilderness, I think, that I have learned that my faith is tested. It's in the wilderness that God is molding me and shaping me into the person that he's created me to be. And so when we talk about family in the wilderness, I think it's just so important for us to know that this is a common theme all throughout Scripture. We're going to be diving into Exodus for sure to look and see what this exactly looks like for us. But it's a common theme throughout Scripture, not just for the Israelites. If you think about someone like David, who wrote most all of the Psalms, right? He spent a lot of time in the wilderness. The prophet Elijah, the wilderness was really forming for him. For Paul, and more importantly, probably someone that comes to mind often, is Jesus. Like, there was seasons where Jesus intentionally stepped into the wilderness. And so before Jesus even began his ministry, he knew that it was beneficial for him to go into the wilderness and to fast for 40 days and also be tempted by the devil. And you're probably familiar with this story, but it's important to know that the number 40 is pretty significant because not only does that also point back to the times that, like, symbolic of what the Israelites were journeying in the desert for 40 years, but it's also connecting to the dots to demonstrate God's provision. And also, in Hebrew tradition, the number 40 symbolizes growth. The number 40 symbolizes maturity. The number 40 symbolizes life. And so there's something really intentional when we step in to Lent that we're about to step into in a couple weeks. It's 40 days. And not only that, it just occurred to me, I'm turning 40 this year. Oh, pressure. I've always thought about 40 as like, oh boy, I'm halfway done. I know. I'm thinking back, I remember my dad's 40th birthday. This is all free information there. My dad, remember your birthday? What was it? It was all black. It was a black theme party. We've got this wrong. So I'm turning 40 this year, so this is a big year for me, I think, where I'm actually committing, and I'm saying, no, I want this to be a year of growth and maturity in life for me. Hold me accountable to that. But this is why Lent is so significant for followers of Jesus. It's an intentional 40 days leading up to Easter that we fast from something for something, and that's probably the most important language that's been helpful for me, right? And oftentimes we can think of fasting as this opportunity to get something from God. I'm going to fast so that God will, right? And I've had a lot of conversations with this. We enter into that heart posture, and a lot of times God doesn't do the things that we want him to do. He does something different, right? But when we talk about Lent, we're intentionally stepping into a 40 days. We're fasting for the presence of God. We're not fasting for the outcomes. We're not fasting for anything like that. We're fasting for the presence of God. And this is what's significant in the life and ministry of Jesus. This is what happened with him in the wilderness, right? Is that his identity was tested, right? And the devil tried to get in there and bring division and separation from his relationship with the Father. And this is what happens. And this is the thing to kind of stir up a little bit as we talk about wilderness. This is what we're all subject to, where our identity is going to be tested. And the devil's going to try to bring division in between our union with God the Father. And so Jesus taught us that the wilderness isn't something to avoid. It's actually something to embrace. And so if we can expect the things that Jesus encountered, we can expect confusion. We can expect to doubt some stuff. We can expect deconstruction of our faith. Those things aren't bad. But we have to have hindsight on the other side of it, like what's coming, what life is God doing, how does he want to grow me, how does he want to mold me, how does he want to transform me, and how is he going to meet me on the other side of this? And so I know that's easier said than done. And as we talk about, and we're going to have a conversation about Exodus, Allie Harris is going to preach next week, all right? And so there's exciting things coming as we journey through the month and as we step in. And she just came in the room. She just missed the announcement. She's right there. Garth will let you know what we talked about. But the Exodus story shows us that embracing the wilderness is challenging for humanity. Like, this is a challenging thing to actually embrace. And so Jesus is our example of actually how to sit in the wilderness, right? But the Israelites are a case study of the journey that we're all on, that it is in fact hard. And there's something inside of me that just wants to get out of it, to go back to whatever's comfortable, even if that thing is captivity, even if that thing is slavery. Oftentimes that's more comfortable for us than the outcome or the pursuit of freedom, right? And so we're going to have a conversation about this, and to get us started, I want to invite our panel up. Come on up, panel. Christine's going to start us off, and this is our panel of our wonderful ladies here who spent some time this past year working through Exodus. And so they're going to be sharing some thoughts for us. We're going to have some dialogue, but Christine's got some thoughts to start us off.
Wow. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
Good morning. On Exploration Sunday, we like to open with an artist's exploration. And this morning, I'm going to read some poems for us to start off our exploration of Exodus. And I thought it was important, significant, kind of worked out, was really great that we have this all-women panel to explore Exodus. Because when we think of Exodus, we think of Moses most of the time. And there was women who ushered in the liberation before Moses was even born. And the reason that we get excited about that and celebrate women's stories in this church is not because we think women are more important, but because their stories have often not been told. And so we find it significant to see these women named in the scriptures and say, like, oh, I knew we were always a part of this story. And so I want to read a poem based on these women who I would call the mothers of the liberation that we find in the first chapter of Exodus. In Exodus 1:15, the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? And the midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They're vigorous and they give birth before we can arrive. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. Shiphrah and Puah, the mothers of liberation. This is a poem by Drew Jackson called Leap. The dream is no longer deferred, so we leap. We can't help it. It rises up from within, from deep, guttural places. You can't contain our dance. Feel the pit-pat, hear the tip-tap. That's the rhythm of freedom. Let the babies dance. Let them tell us of salvation. Let them lead us to liberation. The babies are inviting us into the dance of the future on the threshold of birth. And we will leap, we will leap, we will leap all the way there. There's one more poem I want to read as we get started. That's straight out of Exodus. And we've been talking a lot about what it means to be family. And it's interesting because Moses' sister, Miriam, is a part of the story from the very beginning, even at his birth. And we see this men and women leading together throughout the story of Exodus. And this is the song of Moses and Miriam. It comes out of Exodus 15. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and rider he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will praise him, my Father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has hurled into the sea, the best of Pharaoh's officers, and drowned in the Red Sea. The deep waters have covered them. They sank to the depths like a stone. Your right hand, Lord, was majestic in power. Your right hand, Lord, shattered the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty, you threw down those who opposed you. You unleashed your burning anger. It consumed them like stubble. By the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The surging waters stood up like a wall. The deep waters congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy boasted, I will pursue. I will overtake them. I will divide the spoils. I will gorge myself on them. I will draw my sword, and my hand will destroy them. But you blew your breath, and the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who among the God is like our Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders? You stretch out your right hand, and the earth swallows your enemies. In your unfailing love, you will lead the people you have redeemed. In your strength, you will guide them to your holy dwelling. The nations will hear and tremble. Anguish will grip the people of Philistia. The chiefs of Edom will be terrified. The leaders of Moab will be seized with trembling. The people of Canaan will melt away. Terror and dread will fall on them. By the power of your arm, they will be as still as a stone until your people pass by, Lord, until the people you brought pass by. You will bring them in and plant them on the mountain of your inheritance, the place, Lord, you made for your dwelling, the sanctuary, Lord, your hands established. The Lord reigns forever and ever. Then Miriam the prophet, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women followed her with tambourines and dancings. And Miriam sang to them, Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver he has hurled into the sea.
Thanks, Christine. So we want to have a conversation about Exodus, and just to give a little bit more framework, this is about a 40,000-foot shot at this entire Exodus story, and that's kind of what this is meant to be. And we're going to be getting into the weeds more as we go. Specifically, as we step into Lent, we're going to be reading one chapter a day as a community. And what's exciting about that, there's 40 days in Lent and 40 chapters in Exodus. And so know that we're going to be getting into it more specific, but we want to have a kind of a high-level conversation right now just to get us oriented to the book of Exodus. And so the first question that we have for the panel, hi, y'all. And maybe as you answer your first question, just introduce yourself. Sure. Tell us who you are and any fun facts maybe about you. So get thinking of that. No more pressure, though. Not more stressful. So just to get us oriented to the book or story of Exodus, what major themes come to mind when you think about the story of Exodus that you want to share with us?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Jess. Okay, so I think when most of us think about the book of Exodus, what probably comes to mind are these like big marquee moments, right? And we all have the iconic Charlton Heston image in our minds, or maybe if you're like me, you could probably like still sing along with the whole Prince of Egypt soundtrack, yeah. And so it's full of these like big stories that are like made for the movies, right? But I think if we kind of, like Mike said, zoom out, right, and take like a 30,000-foot view of this book, I think really one of the main themes of Exodus kind of boils down to this. Yahweh, God of Israel, is different from all the other gods, and he can be trusted. And I think God shows up through the story of Exodus and in all of the ways that he shows up and the way that he acts. He's pointing to his goodness and his faithfulness and his trustworthiness. To kind of unpack that a little bit, I think like it's important for us to understand that at the time, gods in the culture were one, like confined to a specific place. So like the gods of Egypt were really only powerful in Egypt. That's where they had dominion. They weren't really worth much anywhere else. And then you'd have like specific gods for rain or protection in war or for fertility or whatever. And I think what Exodus is showing us right, is that Yahweh is different. He's not like these other gods because, one, Yahweh has dominion over all of creation and in every place. He's not limited to one specific territory. And then I think the other thing that we see is that he's a very personal God, right? He shows up to Moses in the burning bush, and then later in the story, his very presence, which is, remember, the thing that we lost in the garden, right? That was the thing that was taken away, but God comes back. His actual literal presence is in the form of a pillar of fire by night and cloud by day, and he shows up to be with his people. So I think all of these things are just kind of pointing us to like the difference between Yahweh and other alternatives, and because of those things, we can trust Yahweh.
Is this on? Yes. Okay. I'm Alana. So one of the themes that really resonated with me was this idea of God as the deliverer, because throughout Genesis, multiple times he's promising to make this group of people fruitful and into a great nation. And throughout Genesis, we sort of see this slow building. And then when we get to the beginning of Exodus, it's time for the second part of that promise to be fulfilled. They have multiplied under Pharaoh's oppression, but now it's time for them to become the second part of God's promise. So basically you have this sort of tribal, nomadic family that goes into Egypt, and then 400 years later you have a nation that emerges. And I think the part of that resonates with me is that God is this faithful and patient deliverer of them. And one thing you sort of miss in the English translation is there's so many references to birth, delivery, metaphor. I mean, and we even say today, like a doctor delivers a baby. So this idea that God is there with them every step of the way, bringing them forth into the fulfillment of his promise, and he is patient and faithful and trustworthy.
Excellent. I'm Michelle. I think the two kind of main things that stood out for me were remembering. Even like the book of Exodus starts, and when Pharaoh comes to power, the whole concept was that like the God of Abraham was forgotten. So like the respect and the power that the followers of that God had was gone. And then throughout Exodus, it's so much of God having to remind them of his faithfulness because they keep forgetting. And then another theme I would say is that after freedom comes formation, right? Like these Israelites were oppressed for so long, and all they wanted was that freedom. Like that is what they were asking for. And then they finally get it, and I'm sure to some extent they're like, okay, great. Like it's done, it's happened. But God was like, no, I actually had to free you from this in order to form you into what you've needed to be all along. Because the thing that you were held a literal slave to was stopping you from being able to be formed into who I have you to be. So freedom isn't necessarily the last chapter. It's formation that comes after that. So that's that.
Yeah, I think just even reading those poems again this morning, what sticks out to me as a theme is, and I think consistently you see Exodus revisited more broadly culturally, not just in like Christian circles, because of the theme of liberation and this idea that people rise up because that God is a God who hears the cries of the oppressed, and that people rise up who can speak truth to power, who can lead people into places of liberation. And I think, then Moses then becomes the first Christ, and or Jesus, the second Moses. And so you see this just foreshadowing of like who God is and how he sets people free.
Yeah, so coming back to personally, like for you guys personally, like what has impacted you the most about Exodus? Like what do you find yourself sitting in? What do you find yourself processing when it comes to your personal delve into this story? Whoever wants to start us.
Okay. Oh gosh, man. Like, throughout this study, I had such questions. Like, there are a lot of things that happen in Exodus that don't feel too good, that don't sit too well. I think in our journey through our study, one of the things that resonated a ton with me was I felt like I was reading it with a lot more humanity in mind. Like, it's so easy for us to read books of the Bible and like not really think of these people as human beings, like as actual human beings, who had anxiety and nervous systems and fear and hopes and like there's just it's so easy for us to read through the books of the Bible and be like, ugh, it's so annoying that these people are complaining. And you're like, I'm sorry, like there was probably a mom with a 3.5-year-old there walking through the desert. And if you've ever had a 3.5-year-old, like I don't need to elaborate on why that's not great. Like there, and I don't know, I felt like I was reading through these stories and I was like, gosh, to Mike's point, like our nervous systems will so often choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven.
Wow.
And like the signs are there, like the plagues happened and God is performing these miracles and they can see that, but like fear and anxiety will trap us because something that feels unfamiliar is scary. And you've gotten used to the scare that you've been sitting in, right? You've gotten used to regulating the anxiety that you're sitting in. And I just felt like I read through these stories with a lot more empathy of the humanity of it and the things that God was calling people to and what a massive undertaking those things were.
Yeah, one of the things that the Bible teacher said was they had broken spirits and they had had no time for right rest or right worship, and that God gave them time to adapt because that was what he wanted for them. But one of the things that was most impactful to me, and Christine made reference to this, is that there are multiple deliverers in this book, that there are a lot of women that play a really important role, from Moses' mom and sister to Pharaoh's daughter who hid him, to even later his wife who performs a ceremonial act that allows him to step into that role, which I love that so much, but as a woman reading the Bible, you often struggle to find yourself and find heroes in these stories. But then I just love this idea that Pharaoh was so afraid that the male Hebrews were going to rise up against him, and it was really the women who took him down. No, but what I'm... I mean, it's true. But what resonates with that for me is that these small acts of faithfulness, these small acts of resistance, these small acts of standing up for life and God's love and the importance of humanity are not wasted. God used all of them along the way, and that we can choose these small things in our lives that will have big world-changing impact.
Do you have anything, Jess? Okay. I do want to come back to just the idea of, or the like, thinking through wilderness seasons for all of us in the room, right? And if anybody's like me in this space, lots of areas of doubts, questioning God's provision, questioning his goodness. Like, is he really gonna show up or not? And I think I'm just thinking back to what you're saying, Michelle, just in terms of the ways that God works with that. Like, he's not off put by that. And there is a lot of power, I think, in recognizing the humanity of the Israelites and to personalizing it in the ways that you were. And so I just wonder if there's something, if anybody here can speak to observations that you have of that, maybe even through your own life, of how like you've experienced God showing up in the midst of your doubts. But this wilderness theme there's like lots of room for that. I'm just prompting something. Like, is there? And again, we'll come to everybody in just a few minutes to be able to make observations and chime in on the conversation. But is there anything stirring there for you that you've experienced, or any insights you can bring into that?
Yeah, so when I think about this narrative of the Israelites being really in like very dramatic fashion taken out of this pretty awful situation, right? Yahweh delivers them, he rescues them out, and almost immediately they start grumbling and complaining against Moses and against God and saying, well, at least in Egypt we had food, right? Or like maybe slavery wasn't so bad, because at least there was, I think, the stability of an empire to like provide some structure and some order. And in the ancient Near East, there's this like the difference between like order and chaos is a really big theme. And so in their minds, going into the wilderness was going into chaos. And it's like, there's no order here. There's no structure here. This is all unknown. And so I would rather go back to like, even though the reality was terrible, at least there was this like stability and structure, and we knew what to expect, right? And sometimes that's like more comfortable. So I think I've seen that in my own life. It's, like you said, Michelle, a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. Like we tend to kind of just put our trust in situations that are more stable or predictable, even if they're really not that great. So I think what I've been really processing and thinking about is like, how do I get to know God in such a way that putting my trust in God and only God is more of a reflex. Like it's just like a natural response to who I know God to be, and putting my trust only in God becomes actually easier and more natural than trusting in all of these other like order and structure and stability that I have in other places.
Thank you.
I think what comes to mind for me is the provision of the manna and in the wilderness, and how I heard a strategic planner, Ron Bueno, you guys know, he spoke here in November. He started we hired him to do like a 2-year strategic planning process, and he started by saying, there's nothing biblical about planning ahead. And I'm like, are you kidding me? We just are like paying you to get us to plan ahead. And I know some of us in the room, like everything in us is like bucking at that statement. But then he kind of led us through. He's like, the manna was for today. This was like the daily bread, and you couldn't even hang on to it or it would spoil. And then Jesus says, don't worry about tomorrow. And how do we become a people, like what Jess was saying, who have this reflex that truly believe in, like, today I have my daily bread. Like, I have all that I need. Like, today God's presence is with me. I'm okay. I'm good. And I think that when I think of the wilderness seasons in my own life, that's been the lesson. Like, oh, I have my daily bread. Like, God is with me. I have all I need.
Just for next time I want to talk. I want to have.
You have anything, Alana? To chime, do you have anything you wanted to say on that? Or?
I think, I should preface this by saying our Bible study was only the first half of Exodus, so no spoilers, please. No. For myself, I've had some health challenges in the last few years, which culminated in a surgery on my foot, and there's been this long process of healing, and 2 steps forward, one step back, and that has felt like a wilderness. There have been times that are dark and frustrating, and I felt bitter and angry at God, and all the emotions, and I could really resonate with the Israelites and how they felt in the wilderness. But what I took from that is that God answered them no matter how they approached him. There were times when they approached him in faithfulness. I mean, they did leave Egypt with Moses. That was an act of faith. But then there were times when they were complaining and whining and like, we don't have enough food, we don't have water. And no matter how they approached God, he responded, and he was with them, and his presence was there, and he was patient with them. And so for me, what I take from that is just that even when the times when I'm bitter and angry and frustrated and don't want to talk to God, he is still there with me, and his presence is with me, and he is patient with me, and he's not angry at my emotions, whatever those happen to be. So.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's continue to press into that then, just from a personal, like for Jess, Michelle, and Christine, if you want to speak to this as well. Just like speaking to a specific season that you were formed in the wilderness. Like, I mean, the reality here, there's probably quite a few of us that would say that's kind of where I'm at and trying to make sense of it. And there's something that builds faith, I think, to hear from those that maybe can speak to some personal experiences and how you were formed in that season. And so, do you guys have anything you want to share in that?
All right, I'm up. Yeah, this question almost immediately brought a very specific time to mind. For me, the clearest wilderness season of my life came at the end of 2019. I had a really grueling postpartum experience with Margot, our second daughter. And she was born in 2018, so like a year after that, I actually finally felt like we're turning the corner here. Like things are looking up. I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Like we're gonna be okay. And was just feeling like we're in a really good place in life. And Kurt and I celebrated our 10-year marriage anniversary that year. And we celebrated by going to Paris for the first time. It was magical. Like we just had this really incredible time. We were celebrating like where we were in our lives. And then the day before we were set to fly home, he got an email from work about like some restructuring that was happening in his company, and found out that he was being laid off. So, and I had stopped working when Margot was born, so this left us with 2 toddlers, 0 income. It was really scary. Like we came back home just feeling like, wow, we've been like dumped into the wilderness. We don't know what's next. And then a few months later, COVID hit. So any hope of like finding another full-time position for him just kind of vanished. And it felt lonely, it felt scary, it felt just like we don't know what is next. And we felt like we were kind of wandering a little. But the crazy thing is we now look back at that season, and he ended up not being fully employed for almost 18 months. It's a long stretch. But we look back at that season of our lives with just like so much gratitude. We got to spend so much time together as a family. We were kind of forced to, because we all did, but we got to witness so much of our daughter's like early years together, and that was so beautiful. And I think how we were really formed in that, though, was that I think we were able to truly see not just like, oh, people are taking care of us, which was absolutely true. Like, yes, primarily through this church family, like we made it through that wilderness season. We were cared for in tangible and intangible ways, like just across the board for a really long time. But I think God really showed us through that season that this isn't like people taking care of us. This is God taking care of us through his people. And that reality became like so real for us in that time.
Yeah, it's even just thinking through the story of Exodus, right? That is a huge component to this, where it was really hard, really scary, a lot of fear, but they were together. And being able to see that wilderness seasons, oftentimes our natural reaction can be bad. Like, God, why are you doing this to me? Yeah. But the joy of togetherness, that you're not alone in this. And so, thank you for sharing that. Anybody? Do you have anything, Michelle?
No, I want to answer the next question you have.
Oh. Okay. I've got a few on here that I haven't gotten to, so why don't you just take it away?
What are you going to say?
What's
the question? The question of the advice about the wilderness.
Okay,
Michael.
yes, right, here we go. What words, Michelle? What words of encouragement do you have for somebody that might be in the wilderness?
How unexpected. Okay. I would say, kind of back to like the theme of remembrance, when you are in that place, like, don't question in the dark what God told you in the light. God made it very clear before they left what he had for them. And then they got in there, and they're like, as so many of us do, we get in that spot, and we really question if we did hear from him. We're like, did he really say that? Did he really make that promise? So in those times, which kind of leads into my second piece of advice, like, surround yourself with people who will remind you the things that God has done and said, who will remind you who you are. And the second piece of advice is more just about the idea of, like, staying in the room with God. Like, if there's a good chance, if you're sitting here, you have felt the love and kindness and faithfulness of God at some point in your life. And he is worth staying in the room with. In the wilderness, it's easy to feel abandoned, and it's easy to feel alone and isolated. But he is worth it. Like, he's worth waiting out for. And, like, we grow so weary of waiting upon God, and we forget how long and graciously he once waited for us. And he's worth it. And I also remember I have a third piece of advice. I like so deeply believe in the power of prayer, and not in like a pandering sense. Like, I so genuinely think that if you are in a place and you allow people to intercede for you, that your trajectory will change. Like, you might not have capacity to hold hope for yourself in that moment, but other people can, and that means something, and that will make a difference for you. So you have to let people into those moments, which is so hard because there's nothing the devil loves more than for you to isolate yourself in that. There's nothing he wants more than for you to stay in that dark by yourself. But when you bring things to the light, when you allow other people to be in it with you, intercessory prayer while you're in the wilderness makes a difference.
Any other just closing thoughts before we open it up to the room? Anybody want to say anything? No? Okay, there'll be opportunities. So, yes, we have a panel up here, but I think as I look out there, we have a full room full of experts of the wilderness. and so I say that to just tee that up to say, this is a space to bring some questions and we can have some response, but if there's also insight and wisdom or reflections that you would like to bring to our family here, we want to learn from you in that. And so Kellen is in the back, ready to bring a microphone to you. So if you can just keep your thoughts to the point, share, and we'll... I say that in the most loving, kind way.
You could just hurry that up.
No, don't.
This is totally a question.
Yeah.
One of the things that I enjoyed most about this study was the way that we read Exodus, because many times as you read the stories that you may or may not have grown up with, you already have a preconceived notion of what's happened, and it's like, yeah, let's get through this first chapter. So what advice would you give as we enter into the season of Lent and are reading this chapter by chapter? How to read it and how to be thinking about it in a way that's not just routine.
Two thoughts on that. One, this study gave me a newfound appreciation for genealogies, which historically I've just kind of, haven't we all? We kind of glazed through them. But I think Jen Wilkin, the author of the study, did a really wonderful job pointing out the specific importance of like why that was included. And that can apply to any other type of like laborious information or things that feel irrelevant to us. But in that instance, she showed how that genealogy was placed right there in the story, in the narrative, to remind the people, hey, I'm still carrying out my plan. Slavery, you've been in slavery for 400 years, but this is still the people I have chosen. This is still my covenant promise, and I'm still going to be faithful to that promise. And I'm going to just remind you again, like, here is how it has played out and how it's carried through. That's why the genealogy is in there. It's not just some, like, little detail on the side. It's to remind the people, like, this is Yahweh showing his faithfulness, his covenant promise through the generations. So that was really helpful. The other thing that I loved was, I might butcher the word, I think she called it a chiasmus. Do you guys remember this? Where it's like a narrative structure where the format is like A, B, X, B, A. This is going to sound really like pedantic, I don't know. But it was really helpful to be able to see, like, oh, this is why it just like pauses right in the middle of the story and he goes into all the details about how to do the Passover meal, because that felt really like jarring and weird when you just read through the narrative. But if you understand, oh, it's like structured in this way for a specific reason to like bring you to this point, and then the things are supposed to almost like unfold like a book where you're seeing like this leading up to the, anyway, that was really helpful for me. So I think to kind of answer the question, maybe, it's helpful to have studies like this that can help us make sense of the text, especially when we're reading stories that we're all like really familiar with. So it can really like bring new light to things.
Yeah, I would add to that. I didn't really realize there were like different types of theology, but my understanding that this is our study was what was considered biblical theology, which is where you're sort of looking for themes and overarching concepts. You're approaching it a little bit more like you would approach a text in your high school English class. So I would say don't be afraid to kind of look for those themes and repeated words and things like that perhaps you might not have noticed before when you're just sort of reading it straight. And then I had something else to say and I forgot it. So we'll come
If it comes back, just interrupt.
There's also just like so many nuggets
resources.
that point to, resources. I was gonna say there's so many nuggets in Exodus that point to Jesus that I wouldn't have caught on my own.
Totally.
I'm going to take this opportunity to point you to our resource page on the website.
Our library.
Yeah, so for each theme in each series, we curate resources for you that are on the website. There's a resource page. You scroll down to the bottom of the website. It says resources, and those are put together there, so you don't have to like set yourself free on the whole internet to try to figure this out. So I just want to point that out.
Yeah, there's books, reliable podcasts. I mean, we all have some resources we could recommend.
Michelle, did you?
I feel like they got it.
Got it. All right. Thanks, Ariel. Who else? Laura.
Hi. Okay, 2 questions, maybe related, maybe not. You decide how you want to take them. Where did you find yourselves? What did you do with some of the more uncomfortable parts of this story? Like plagues, babies being murdered, like what did you do with that? And then I'm curious your guys' take on, like, you talked about it being a narrative and that stuff. Like, how literally do you think we're meant to take the stories that unfold in the book of Exodus?
Good questions. Anybody want to?
It like really worked me, man. Like okay, and maybe to answer the question there, like when we're going through this, I would highly recommend not doing it by yourself. Because the benefit was that we met every week and I came with such questions that I still am questioning, but it's beneficial when you are also talking to someone like who grew up reading it differently. Like I feel like if you grow up in the same church your whole life, you're like, well, we've all been taught these stories the same. We're all coming in with the same experience and theology. But it was so sweet to be in a room of women who all had very different experiences and like were hanging their hat on different things. But like a lot of the challenging questions of what am I supposed to do about how I interpret the character of God when I'm seeing a God who feels vengeful, who the final plague is killing a firstborn. We're losing sleep over it. Like it's a lot to take in, and I know there are resources and when I had presented that question, Amy had brought up that she had listened to a podcast, and the idea was that we're meant to view the Old Testament through the lens of Jesus. Like Jesus came as the most perfect representation of the character of God. So like that is what I have to keep coming back to, because I'm like, oh, okay, the person of Jesus, like that's sitting a little better with me. I think I'm still wrestling through how to like piece both of them together, I guess. But oh yeah, and then there's the aspect of it's like, well, maybe this all never happened anyway. Like, excuse? Like, what? But I think it's a really important journey for us to go on. A, for us to figure out what we individually believe to be true, and B, what that means for our theology now, right? Like, even if so Alana brought up, she's like, well, there's actually no recorded history that the Israelites were even in Egypt. And I was like, what book are you reading? For me personally, though, that doesn't change the Jesus that I follow. That doesn't change how I'm living my life and how I'm trying to usher the kingdom of God in. But it might for someone else. Like that might be a hat hanging moment. So don't read through this by yourself, because I also think the concept of like God giving us our daily bread isn't just the physical things that we need. I think God gives us things in abundance that other people might be lacking. And I think one of those things is also wisdom. Like, I think there are things that we come to the table with that you're like, no, I actually feel like I have a stronger understanding of this that someone else doesn't, and vice versa. So I think daily bread is also in wisdom and how God works through the people in our lives to speak to us, to kind of fill in those gaps.
I think I would just add too, 'cause, I mean, I thought about this even reading Moses and Miriam's song, like it's celebrating the horse and rider thrown into the sea. And I think what really changed that understanding for me is worshiping with people who have been actually oppressed. And there was a song that we sang in Caracas. I mean, it was a worship song. It was upbeat. It was tambourines, and it was like, I praise God because the horse and rider have been thrown into the sea, and we would sing this over and over. And when you're singing that song with the people who literally are like under a dictatorship, it changes everything. And there are real enemies and real oppressors in the world. And I think, you often, hopefully often have heard me say, like, when we can start to read Black theologians and Latino theologians and theologians who are writing from this place of living in an oppressed state, that changes the lens from which we read what it is to be brought out of slavery, to be brought out in freedom, and what it is to celebrate oppression being overcome. And so I do think that's an important lens for those of us who live in lots of privilege to be able to understand the scripture and where it was written from.
Thanks, Christine. We have time for 2 more questions. Roughly, maybe. Hi, Beth.
Thank you, guys. You are so wise. I'm a little bit back to the practical and maybe a different take on the wilderness. I have found myself multiple times in my life walking alongside people I love who are in the wilderness when I am not necessarily, or in a different wilderness. And I'm curious if you have take on what that looks like to be family to people, to someone you love who's in the wilderness when you are not, and how, if you could speak to the weariness of that, or the endurance of that, or not maintaining joy in the midst of that, etc.
So good. Yeah, Lana?
I think that's where remembrance really comes in. Speaking personally with my experience with my foot, there were times when I couldn't remember a life without pain, but my husband reminded me, remember, God healed that. You felt better last month. And, that act of being the encourager and remembering and reminding people of God's promises and faithfulness and healing and things like that is so important in community.
I would just add that I think if we look at how God cared for the people, his own people that he was sending into the wilderness, is he gave them his presence. And I think we can do the same, like just be with people. And I think it was the presence of God that allowed the Israelites to be formed into a people who could replace this like previous existence that was about like being controlled and being oppressed, to entering into like a trust-based existence. They were only able to do that because God was with them, like caring for them. And I think we have the opportunity to do that, to come alongside those who are in the wilderness and just offer our presence as a reminder of God's presence.
The only thing I would add is I recently heard someone say, Miriam packed a tambourine, which means she expected to sing songs. And I think they didn't not sing a song until they were in the promised land. Like, they played the tambourine and danced and sang songs in the wilderness. And I think we can be a people who pack a tambourine as a way of saying, I believe we were going to sing songs at every part of this journey, and I will be here to sing a song for you.
I feel like we need to get a tambourine. At least, so if someone has one, bring it. It'd be, as we keep talking about this, it would just be appropriate for, at least definitely for Lent. We'll see. I used to play the tambourine, by the way. Garth, tell him. Garth did too. Garth would yo-yo and tambourine at the same time. That brings hope like a yo-yo. It is a form of worship. I think there's just something really beautiful, Beth, just to your question of holding the tension of someone that's celebrating and someone that's mourning, right? And I know for me, there's always been a reluctancy to bring my joy in a relationship with someone that's mourning. But I think about even like my relationship with my wife or my relationship with Garth or whoever it might be. There have been plenty of seasons where they needed me and I needed them. And they were at a place where they were able to carry me. And so I think just some way, I think I'm saying like I need to get over myself in some ways of like it's okay if like it's okay for me to bring my abundance into someone that is in a season of wilderness. Like I shouldn't have to feel at odds with that. Like oftentimes that's what that person needs is clarity and perspective. And I've been grateful for seasons like that much of those wilderness seasons for me, Jessie was in a place of abundance. And she was able to carry me in those places. And so I think that's the beauty of the church family as well. One last question.
I have a tambourine.
Yes, with you?
I'm kidding.
Oh.
Cowboy hat lady. What's your name? Laura. Laura, I just want to genuinely thank you for your question. I really, and probably I'm thanking you for many people in here. And maybe they don't have it right now, but they had it. And maybe they don't have it right now, but they will have it. So I can't speak for everybody, and this perspective is just my own, but I remember I met a priest once who said something that was helpful to me. And I'm trying to get it right. He said, I don't think that God sent Jesus into the world to change God's mind about humanity, but to change humanity's mind about God. And so, I think that, I think we've all struggled or probably will struggle with the Bible to some degree in the stories within. But I think what's been helpful for me is just to go, I think we get caught up in did this happen or did this not happen? And I think for me, I go, I don't really need to know because I know people in present day that think very different things about God and images of God. And so I don't get caught up too much in going, wow, there are different perspectives about God in the Bible. Jesus paints a very different picture than I find in many places in the Old Testament. And so I like that. I like that Jesus came to go, man, you really thought God was kind of like Hitler. I came to show you a different perspective. Second question, probably the most important question is for Pastor Christine. Is that a cloud behind you or cotton candy?
We've got a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire right
No,
here.
here's the real question.
Oh, okay. I thought you were letting me off the hook, Dave.
No. I love what you said. And first of all, if anybody else like cowboy hat, Laura, what a great church it is to have a place where you can ask questions like that and not get kicked out, right?
Well, and to have you jump in and attend to that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So here's the question. Real rubber meets the road question. Here's the real. When you said, God is all we need, I really like that. For me, that sums up the whole Egypt thing, right? The whole Exodus thing of, because I'm in a wilderness place right now. I don't think I'm alone in that. And for me, I think the one thing that God's spoken to me about that's been helpful is God is the promised land. And so, and I think that that's kind of what you were getting at. It's like I keep looking for this other place to go, man, when things get better, that'll be the promised land. And I think that that's probably what the Egyptians or the Israelites were struggling with. Maybe we should go back to Egypt because we had it better. And we keep waiting to get to this place. We ain't getting there. So when is this promised land going? And I think that maybe one of the ways that God was like, well, it's going to be a 40-year thing until you figure out that I am the promised land. The promised land is here in the wilderness. And so I think that's kind of what you were saying. But here's the question. The question is, can we make it cotton candy? No, the question is, what does that really look like? Because, and I'm just being honest here, is that I struggle with moments like these in churches. I struggle to when I hear things like that.
Yeah.
Here's why I struggle. Because I go, that sounds really pretty. But I think that we somehow can get a little further down the road with God by not giving information as much as what is that experience like?
Yeah.
Of when you say what, because I believe you. when you say Jesus is all we need in those moments, and it's not these things,
Yeah.
and I go, paint that for me.
Let me do it. First of all, I appreciate you drilling that down, because I think I really try not to be flippant with those responses, especially in this community. And I think part of why we asked these gals to do this is because they wrestle with this for 10 weeks. So Mike and I were like, well, what are we going to say about Exodus that they haven't already wrestled with? And to answer your question, what does it look like? I think it did come. My response to say God is all you need did come from a very wilderness place of getting stripped everything else away. And it was either you're going to trust God's provision, you're going to trust that God will sustain you, you're going to trust that God is who God says God is, or you're going to die. And so what that has come to look like for me, and I think of what Tim Gamba said when he was here, when he said, I think of God as like a national park where you step into it and there's just more and more to explore. Like you think you saw Old Faithful, but Old Faithful is like one part of Yellowstone Park, and you just have more and more. And I think how that relates to Exodus is God told the people what the promised land was going to look like. He said it was good and spacious. And I think of God is all you need means there is room to explore and there is room to breathe. There's goodness in God and who God is. There's provision, all that you need, and sometimes only what you need, but all that you need. There's sustenance, and there is sweetness. He said the land would be flowing with milk and honey. So there's a sustenance, there's the strength that you need, but there's honey. There's dessert. And God knows that we need the sweetness of life, that it's not enough for us just to be sustained. And so I think that's how I would answer your question of what does it mean to know that God is all that God says God is, and that God is all we need. You will have all that you need, and a lot of times that won't come how you think. And that God's presence really will sustain you and bring a sweetness to your life that you thought you needed everything else, but you really just needed God.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for leaning into this space. I want to encourage you, we're going to continue with this conversation in our community groups. So if you're not in a community group, the hub will be in just a couple weeks, and we'll be facilitating more of this conversation, but also without putting anybody on the spot here, but I'm sure our wonderful panel here would be love to talk with you and meet with you if that's helpful, if you have any questions. And also they'll be available to pray right over here after the service. If you're here and you just need some prayer, we want to be available for you in that. And so let's stand. We're going to invite Amy up. Amy's going to do a benediction over us. So if you don't mind just getting in a posture to just open yourself up. If it's putting your hands out in front of you, it's getting on your knees. Just an honest posture before you and God. And thanks, Amy, for...
Thank you. I don't know if you're in the wilderness right now or if you just came from there recently or if you will be heading there in the future, but I know one of those things is true. And so I'm going to read this prayer blessing over you. It's called a blessing for the wilderness. When you find yourself forgetting the answers that came from unexpected places, the provision that showed up just in time and was just enough, the unexpected detour in your journey that you wouldn't have chosen but led you to an unforeseen mercy, the miracles that you wouldn't have experienced if you weren't faced with an insurmountable situation. When you find yourself forgetting by the evening the manna that you received just that morning, wondering if his mercies really will be new again tomorrow, may you be reminded of the stories, yours, mine, and all of ours, stories that could have only happened in the wilderness, in the places where we find ourselves lost or powerless, longing, grieving, or afraid. May we never stop reminding each other of the times when we saw water come from a rock, or a sea turn into the path to freedom, or experienced his presence near to us in the darkness like a guiding flame. May we make it our holy work together to tell these stories to each other over and over. So when you inevitably come to the wilderness again, you won't so easily forget that you are not the first to journey there, and you will not be the first to be left there alone. Amen.